How do left-leaning folks in red rural areas show their neighbors they don't have hoofs and horns? By showing up to help in an organized fashion with bread and butter local needs like food banks and road cleanups. Rather than appear as hated Democrats, they're organizing under the banner of a fast-growing national effort called Community Works. Here's how it works and how you can get started.
I live in rural Appalachian, Virginia, about 50 miles from my family's home place of 7 generations. It's going to be 8 now with my son being born and raised here. And my county has never voted Democrat, even for JFK or FDR. So historically, I think we're probably the reddest, most conservative county in all of Virginia. For 20 plus years, I did community organizing on a regional level around issues of poverty, racism, and violence against women in rural Appalachian communities. And then for 18 of those years, I sat side by side with my conservative Republican neighbors, on those hard, cold benches, watching our children play together. And that was from the time they were in preschool on the monkey bars, all the way up to the high school championship basketball games. I also worked with several of those neighbors to start a local nonprofit to work on obesity prevention and general health and wellness for our kids in the public schools. Then came along what I call the great estrangement of 2016. And suddenly it didn't feel as comfortable being with neighbors who seemed to have such a different national and global worldview from my own. I mean, if nothing else, that election sort of illuminated and put in the national spotlight all of our differences. So that level of trust and sense of we're all in this together for the betterment of our own kids and community was broken. At that point, I felt the need to do something more overtly political than the organizing I had done in the past. And so I became the field director for a 2018 congressional campaign in my very Republican district. The district is the size of New Jersey, and we covered it. We had 100 plus town halls in every town, in every county, and yet we still lost, and we lost big time. So after the official autopsy of our campaign, which I recommend everyone does, several of us decided to continue doing our own reflection and spend some time trying to figure out what we needed to do differently, since clearly our approach, even though we were checking all the boxes, was not effective in our very conservative district. So our candidate, Anthony Flacavino, who is also one of the co-founders of Ruby, started reading and reaching out to others on a national scale, and many of whom were doing their own analysis of that election. Erica Edelson was one of those folks. She had written a book called Beyond Contempt, and she and Anthony and Cody Lonning co-founded the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative. And they began talking about a potential project called Community Works. Well, at the same time, I had become the chair of my local Democratic committee as my way of trying to figure out what to do. And because of the ongoing conversations that I was still having with Anthony as he was forming Ruby, I started encouraging my local committee to do community works type activities. We immediately saw results in our level of participation, and that meant that 3 times the number of people started coming to our local Democratic committee meetings as had been coming when we first started. And I attributed that to the fact that we were doing those community works type activities, which I'll be elaborating on. At the same time, the filmmaker Michael Moore was doing a podcast out of the Midwest called A Blue Dot in a Red Sea. And one of the episodes was called Need Help? Call a Democrat. And that was exactly what I saw as how we needed to position our local Democratic committee in our community, since that's the way Democrats used to be seen in rural areas. And I saw both then, this was back in 2021, 22, and I see now how Community Works is a way to get back to that place. So the Community Works pilot project was born in 2023, and I was hired as its national director.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative overall? And is it a C3,
Sure.
a C4, a PAC?
The Rural Urban Bridge Initiative is a C4. We were officially founded in 2021 as a response to the growing divide between rural and urban voters nationwide. That divide had been growing for decades, but I think people first started really recognizing it and saying we've got to do something about this starting in 2016 and then again with the 2018 and 2021 elections. So Ruby was founded by Anthony Floccavino, Erica Edelson, and Cody Lonning. Our first signature program is called the Rural Urban Divide Training. And we still offer the training to groups across the country to, number one, explore the underlying causes of the divide and why so many rural and working folks have actually left the Democratic Party. And then two, to focus on effective strategies to overcome the divide. So that includes Ruby's Rural New Deal, our Beyond Resistance campaign, our Rural Action Plan. We did an initial report called How Democrats Can Succeed in Rural Areas. All of that can be found on the Ruby website. It's www.ruralurbanbridge.org. And then also Ruby's Community Works program.
It seems like this is really important both for our partisan reasons to help Democrats win statewide, nationwide, because we can't win without winning in rural areas, but more broadly to overcome some of that great estrangement that you reported starting around 2016.
Yes, and that was specifically the goal of the Community Works initiative. We have three different goals. The first is to rebuild trust in our rural communities, which speaks to exactly what I was talking about that I experienced firsthand with my rural neighbors. Secondly, to change the ways that many rural people see and experience liberals and progressives and Democrats, starting in our own communities. Many folks, think of us as just being out in front of the courthouse protesting. A lot of that is happening right now, and rightly so. But again, in some ways, it has helped folks who are not on our side to just kind of dig in to say that, well, this is all Democrats do, or the only thing Democrats do is show up at election time at my door or trying to get money.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the goals, was just to change the ways that people saw us in our communities. And the other thing that has grown as we've done these activities is that we're beginning to see a change in the way that liberals, Democrats, and progressives participate or not in our local communities. I think a lot of people have kind of drawn people who are in such a minority in a red county have just kind of pulled in to themselves and felt very isolated and sometimes even scared to be out there public with their beliefs and values. And this has really opened up a different way for people to get involved. So the community work strategy is actually to work side by side with neighbors to address concrete local needs. It's not about persuasion. It's not about get out the vote. It's about building solid relationships by listening, engaging, volunteering for service actively,
Mm-hmm.
being part of the solution on a local level.
Paint a picture for us of a typical community works project. Who would be out there? What would they be doing? How long does it last for? And what sort of interactions are you seeing between folks on our side and folks on the other side?
Community Works has a acronym by which we judge all our projects. It's SKIP-F, and that stands
Hmm.
for simple, concrete, immediate, public, and frequent. So our intent
Hmm.
is to get groups of volunteers, Democrats, liberals, and hopefully beginning to bring in others, but out there in just a regular way doing good work in the community. So a lot of groups start with a project like just joining in with an ongoing food pantry, but doing it with their Community Works t-shirts or their local Democratic Committee t-shirts on, so that they're there as a presence. A lot of them had been doing that on their own, but now we're saying do it as a group, do it as a presence of Democrats and liberals doing good in the community. We started out with 6 pilot counties in Virginia and Georgia during 2023 and 24. And like so many of our rural committees in red areas, one of those counties just had 4 remaining Old Faithful volunteers who were both the leadership and person power for all the Democratic Committee activities. So they were very worried about taking this on. Um, their first project was to help pack food bags for school children to take home on the weekends. And most of our counties are now involved in some project of that nature. Uh, Close to 20 volunteers showed up to help with that first project that they did. So it showed that for folks to have a different way to participate in the Democratic Committee, in their communities, meant that way more people showed up. A lot of folks, I think, had been made to feel that if they weren't willing to do the kind of traditional electoral politics of phone banking or trekking up my quarter-mile gravel driveway to knock on my door and talk to me about who I was going to vote for, that they then had nothing to contribute to their local Democratic Committee. And by offering opportunities such as packing bags for school children, working with a local food pantry, another one is cleaning up roadsides, or another county is on the Shenandoah River, so they've done river cleanups. All of those have allowed people to participate in a way that better fits their interests, their skills, and also their personalities. Because again, I think most Democratic committees realize that not everybody wants to do the phone banking and the door-to-door canvassing. So it's just been wonderful to see how many more people have gotten engaged because they were given other ways to feel like they could make a difference.
It's a real volunteer draw, I would think, to tell people you can do something very tangible, which I think is one of the elements in your acronym, that is actually both helping your neighbors in a very specific way, as well as helping the Democratic cause. And I, so it's wonderful. It isn't surprising, but it's wonderful to hear how many other people this has brought out. When your volunteers show up for these efforts, are they presenting themselves? Do they wear a Community Works t-shirt? Do they wear a County Democratic Committee t-shirt? And are they comfortable showing up, self-identifying as liberal in this mixed environment?
That's a very good question. Some of our Community Works chapters choose to show up under the Community Works banner wearing Community Works t-shirts. They are uncomfortable putting themselves out there immediately as Democrats. They feel that people will just completely, turn them off if they do that.
Hmm.
One of the benefits of our banner, it's like if people, we had one group that were offering crafts activities at their local farmers market. for kids at the local farmers market. And, so many parents were just thrilled to be able to bring their kids over and do these activities. If it had been the Democratic committee banner on the table, they wouldn't have brought their kids over. It was the Community Works banner. And so then, they came week by week. And as that happens, we have a brochure that people can use or not use, but it defines Community Works. And in the second paragraph, it says, many of us are also Democratic volunteers. I like to always lead with we are volunteers who are Democrats, not with the big D Democratic Party or even the big D Democratic Committee, but we are volunteers. We are people who are Democrats. And I think a lot of our chapters have chosen that approach. There are others who, they are hardcore Dems, want to be out there as Democrats, wear their Democratic t-shirts. If that works for them and they feel like they are able to reach across partisan lines, even wearing their t-shirts, then we had the flexibility for that. We put it very much on the local level as to those kinds of decisions about how they do the work. But what we found most of the time is that the Community Works banner offers a buffer. And sometimes it's also with like local nonprofits who are shy of, working with any Democratic committee or any political identity just because they're worried about their C3 status. Whereas they'll work with Community Works and then, so whereas they will work with Community Works. One example would be we were doing a dog food drive in my county, and we first reached out to the Humane Society. Well, the Humane Society here is just, it's all liberals. They did not want to work with the Democratic committee. They were even somewhat shy of working with Community Works because they didn't want to be identified as liberals and progressives and Democrats. We then reached out as Community Works to the local sheriff's department, and they were like, yes, we need dog food for the pound. When Community Works chapters are able to work under the Community Works banner, then we had the potential to draw in all these other groups who would not traditionally work with a local Democratic committee, either because they're worried about their own C3 status or they're worried about how that's going to look in the community and them getting associated with the Democrats. But if it's under the Community Works banner, what we're able to do is Community Works is sponsoring this local, dog food drive. And then on the bottom, we have all the folks who are helping with that. So that could be the sheriff's department. We've been very successful with them on this because they want the food for the dogs in the pound. The Humane Society, the local Democratic committee, it can, when we're putting it at the bottom under a Community Works effort, then folks are comfortable with it. So Community Works really provides that sort of buffer.
When folks who are on the other side, when you describe to them what Community Works is, how do they respond? Especially when you get to that second paragraph or the second line where, incidentally, many of us are Democrats.
We had one of our pilot counties in far southwestern Virginia who started out working with this was a food pantry done by the Baptist church down there. And they very much did not want to put themselves out as Democrats when they first started doing that. So they were wearing their Community Works t-shirts, identifying as Community Works. They've now been doing it for 2 years. And everybody they're working with now knows that they are Democrats. But it took building that relationship for them to be comfortable putting themselves out there in that way. I think that's really interesting because I think it speaks to both parts of what we're trying to do. on the one hand, we want people in the community to see Democrats differently, but we also want Democrats to engage differently, because oftentimes Democrats shoot ourselves in the foot because we assume people aren't going to work with us if they find out that we are Democrats. Sometimes that's not so. Sometimes we've just put all that on ourselves because we feel isolated and sort of alienated from our communities. But once we start getting engaged in our communities and being out there, and the more we do it and the more comfortable we become doing it, then the more we're also able to reveal our full identity. And we've seen that really happen with folks that have been involved with community works from the beginning.
So community works can both heal Democrats and liberals as well as help the community. It involves or hopefully can involve or result in personal change on our side.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And it's so exciting to see that happen. Another example of that, and this is on a whole different level, but is that we've also had folks who got involved who had, were just completely disengaged from any kind of civic life in their community. They had been very involved doing good things through their church, but had never gone to a town council meeting, had never been to a school board meeting, because they really just felt like their voices didn't matter, would not be listened to, would not be heard, and they didn't have anything to say. This was particularly true in one of our Georgia counties in the sort of mid-central Georgia. And once they got involved in community works, then especially the leader of that chapter started going to town council meetings to tell them what community works was doing, to try to get their support, to try to find partners. Of course, as she did that, she started listening to what was happening there. And as she started listening to what was happening there, she started getting mad and started putting her own voice into the mix, and was heard. And because of that, then she got some of her other volunteers, again, who had only been, volunteers in their local AME church. And now they were coming to these meetings, and they were also being heard. Out of that, she was asked to serve out a school board term of somebody who had left, and now is considering running for political office, local office. Another person involved had never been involved. She's a young adult, and she ended up starting a young Dems chapter there. So, we've seen that level of growth, all because of initially getting involved with community works. And again, getting involved in a way that was comfortable for that person and fit that person's personality and their skills, and appreciated what they had to offer. I think the best example of how we've been able to reach across the partisan lines and work together is in one of our counties in the Shenandoah area of Virginia. And they took on a project that was E. coli testing in the Shenandoah River, because in their community that had become a big problem, and that was both a economic, tourist related problem, but also a public health problem. And so they got involved by helping with Friends of the Shenandoah River, a fundraiser, but we always attach everything we do to action. So they also did a river cleanup to go along with that. They went to their almost entirely Republican town council to ask for support. They got it. And then since then, that town council has actually come to them to ask for help with other projects that the town council wanted to do. And so that chapter has become, this known entity in that county. People know that they're Democrats. It was really initiated by the local Democratic committee there, and with local Democratic committee volunteers, and they've always been transparent about that. Again, they don't lead with the
Right,
big
right.
part, but they always let it be known that they are Democratic volunteers. And so I think that's really meant that there was that kind of dialogue, again, because it's focusing locally and it's not looking at the national divide, all the national mess, right? So one of our catchphrases, I guess, is as you know, while politicians in Washington are arguing across the partisan lines, we are getting things done in our communities. And I think
Excellent.
as long as we can kind of keep our focus local and grassroots, then hopefully this will go up. I don't think we're working, it's community works. We're not working from national down. We're working from community level up.
How has the program grown over the last few years, and how many states, counties are you active in? How many community works volunteers might there be out there at any given time?
We started with 6 pilot counties in Virginia and Georgia during 2023-24. And we have now grown to, let's see, midway through 2025, we opened up the network to groups across the country. So at this point, we have 12 chapters in 6 states with sister groups that have spun off of the CWorks model in at least 3 other states. Speaking to sort of the growth within those chapters, in one of our pilot counties, they started with 5 people. That's what we require for a Community Works leadership team. And now they have over 100 volunteers of all ages from across the political spectrum involved. And as they like to say, when they first got going, they were knocking on doors to let folks know that they were there and they were ready to help. And, you know, could they, what kind of volunteer help did either organizations need or what kind of help did individuals needs? And now people are knocking on their door and they have, you know, are overwhelmed with the number of requests that come to them for help. That was one of our first counties, and I would say I'm hearing more and more that same sentiment from the counties that have developed chapters since then. In terms of states, we currently have CWorks chapters thriving in Virginia and Georgia, of course, because that's where we started. Plus now we have newer groups in Maryland, Washington State, Alabama, and then most recently, Kansas. And our sister groups that we know of are in Georgia, Wyoming, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And many of those groups have started through their local Democratic committees, but as we've opened it up beyond the pilot project, then we also have local indivisible groups or other liberal progressive entities and communities that have come to us to try to start a Community Works chapter.
For a local group that wants to get involved in community works, what are the first 2 or 3 steps to get involved?
The first step to getting started as a local Community Works chapter is to attend one of our monthly introductory Zooms. And we hold those every 4th Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The second step is to get at least 4 other people from your county and network to attend one of those introductory sessions, because we want to make sure everyone is on the same page about our approach. The third step is to form a 5-person leadership team out of folks who have attended those sessions, and at which point that group then petitions to become a local chapter. And then we get you hooked up with all the resources we offer. Those include multiple networking and leadership development opportunities that are every other week, every month, quarterly, and our annual Community Work Summit. We also offer workshops around developing a functioning leadership team, building community collaborations and partnerships, jumpstarting first projects. A lot of people, it's like they'll talk and talk and talk forever. And we're just like, just start by doing something. Just take something simple, concrete, immediate, and do it. So we
Mhm.
do a workshop around that. We have another one around recruiting and nurturing volunteers, because that's huge. We recently offered one about promotion and mobilization through print and social media. We have a new community works, I'm sorry. We have a new communications director with Ruby who just has so much to offer. And so that's a particularly good one. And then we're also offer a grassroots fundraising workshop. I think, again, a big lesson has been that folks kind of go around and they're like, oh, let's start they have this concept that they're out there to start a whole nonprofit effort. And for this, that's not our intent. What our intent is, again, to get out there immediately as groups of volunteers who are representing Democrats and liberals in a positive way in the community. And so the more activities we can do, the more we can publicize those activities, the better. We've also learned that it's really helpful to do a sort of community assessment to begin with and reach out to all the different agencies and groups that are already doing stuff in the community, find out, tell them about us, but the point is to find out what they are doing and what their needs are. Oftentimes, the two needs they lift up are a need for additional volunteers and a need for funds. And we are there, to certainly to offer the volunteer labor. And then in many times, as I had said in a previous example, we are able to help with fundraising efforts as long as we are tying it to some concrete local action to go along with it. So one example of a really successful community works project that I have been actually a part of here in my community works chapter was distributing gun locks. And the reason this was so perfect for the goals of community works is that instead of maybe doing a listening forum or a workshop that comes at it from, okay, I love Moms Demand Action. I'm just using them as an example here, but we're coming from Moms Demand Action or Everytown to do this workshop for all of you in our community, where it's already a given that these groups have a certain policy position. And so the workshop is about persuasion. What we were able to do was hook into a group called the Gun Aware Project that's completely about gun safety. And so we are giving out gun locks. I did it at my local elementary school. And again, as I've mentioned earlier, my neighbors are hardcore, or it's very Republican here. So to be able to sit there and be giving out gun locks, I also did it at the local Christmas store. And not trying to persuade anyone of anything, but basically saying, here's a gun lock and here's a little thing about gun safety. I had 30 men come by who in other circumstances would be in camo, and either taking a gun lock or saying to me, yes, I have a gun safe, and having a conversation about it. And I live up in the woods here in my Red County, and I'm a gun owner. So it was sort of making that connection that there would be assumptions on both sides, but here I'm saying, yeah, I think this is really important, and I've got gun locks, and then them talking about their experience, and it just opening up a level of dialogue that you don't have when you're coming at it already saying, well, this is our policy position and we want you to join it.